Hi, and welcome to the third podcast from the Simple event, which is all about funding and social finance. In this episode, we're going to listen in to the outcomes of 5 discussions. We'll hear from Clare Fitzgerald from the Government Outcomes Laboratory at the University of Oxford, Francis Northrop from the New Economics Foundation, Hanna from the Esme Fairbairn Foundation, Gareth Hart from Iridescent Ideas, and Sam Magne from the National Lottery Community Fund. So do have a listen to the outcomes of some of the subjects that were discussed. We'll be looking at accountability, investment, collaboration, sustainability, and how we can all encourage positive behaviours. So let's hand over to Dawn Plimmer, who'll set the scene.
The next session is going to be quite an open, flexible chance to have a conversation with others, to reflect on what you've heard so far today and develop your thinking further. And I'm pleased to say that we've got some facilitators, some hosts of these discussions who all bring different expertise to the conversations. So in a moment I'm going to ask Sam, Clare, Francis, Hanna and Gareth to just say 30 seconds about themselves, and then you're welcome to join whichever conversation fits best. Next we have Clare, who'll be in Main Hall 1.
Hi everyone, I'm Clare Fitzgerald. I'm from the Government Outcomes Lab at the University of Oxford. And so my background is in public management and performance management, which might be a bit of a hot topic here. And so in the session today on sort of accountability and social impact, I think the idea is to talk through accountability in terms of to service users, maybe to results of a particular program or organization, and also maybe some of the democratic accountability questions in terms of collaborative working. On the social impact side, I think it is around sort of what constitutes reasonable measurement of social impact, who gets to define what that is, and having a conversation around sort of what is evidence, what should it look like, what form should it take, and how do we make sure that our accountability systems are sort of matched, fit for purpose with the way that we talk about social impact.
My name is Clare Fitzgerald. I'm a research fellow at the Government Outcomes Lab at the University of Oxford at the Blavatnik School of Government. We have a dual remit. So what we do is high quality, really rigorous academic research on how public services can be better organized and delivered by, charities, by voluntary sector organizations, by local authorities, by Whitehall, and then we take what we learn from that academic research and try to make that a very close relationship with an outreach program that we run to help the people who run those organizations make better decisions based on high quality evidence and based on the experiences and expertise of their peers, and really facilitate those kinds of conversations amongst those groups. My own background is in performance measurement and management, which can be a hotly debated topic, I suppose, right? Yeah. So there are believers and then there are naysayers. I think actually both sides of the debate have a point. Yeah. So part of the conversation we had today was around how you maybe make accountability regimes fit for purpose. So what kinds of measurement are reasonable to hold organizations to account with? Who are they accountable to? Is it to service users? Is it to the people funding them? Are there concerns around democratic accountability?
Are we getting to a point where people are recognising that performance indicators are necessary, but they need to be kind of humanised in some way?
I think KPIs have taken on a bit of a life of their own, right? And the idea behind doing KPIs and other kinds of performance indicator things was never to articulate that they were a perfect picture of the reality of service delivery, particularly when you're working with complex individuals. And so I think some of this is around changing the rhetoric or promises of performance measurement systems. But I think you're exactly right. KPIs are only ever crude proxies for the reality around us. And so the key sort of differentiator between KPIs being a lazy shorthand versus a useful tool is the degree to which managers can subsequently use that information to make substantive improvements. So if you think through perhaps a lot of the recent research on what quote unquote works in performance management, a lot of it is around creating sort of forums for learning. the promise of KPIs, the promise of management systems is around the space that people can come together, reflect on the data that they see, and make different or adjust the decisions that they have on a day-to-day basis. And so it is not punitive, it is an opportunity to experiment, shift practice, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Do you detect a change or do you detect more talk?
Can I detect both?
Yeah, you can.
So I think people have been burned by measurement systems, right? And so there's definitely, I think, a need for space for people to continue to articulate the frustrations that they've experienced with measurement and management systems that they feel have not necessarily captured the difficulty or the success that they've faced in their jobs. And I think we should listen to what they have to say. There is a growing conversation around making adjustments for people who want to work collectively. So, how do you build in better face-to-face time with the people who are funding your services? Right. Can you get them to come visit and see what you do on a day-to-day basis? And reflect on different trends, right? And sort of opening up, I suppose, the internal black box of your organization to a much broader audience. And being confident in doing that. And I think the conversation today just highlighted that there are some sort of not easy ways to start doing things that look that way, but I think people will start shifting.
Themselves can maybe be more flexible on the sorts of measurement that they want to see. Experiential buddying was the term, right? But the idea that you would, instead of insisting on a passive report that you maybe cast an eye over and then make a budgetary decision on, that you actually spend time in the organizations that you're funding to understand sort of not just what they're doing, but what the vibe is.
Frances on views of investment. Hi, so I'm Frances Northrop. I work for the New Economics Foundation, and we go to towns and cities all over the country, and what we find is that the way that we view investment is siloed. So when we talk about social investment, we think about the voluntary community sector, we think about health and social care side of council services and spending, whilst we ignore the fact that the investment that's coming in for regeneration, for other public services that are delivered by councils, are completely operating in a different environment, and they impact quite heavily on the investment and the operations of community voluntary sector activity, when in fact they should be aiding and abetting them. So I'd like to talk more about how we view making money work differently for a place, and how that affects the people that you talked to about bringing the investment and how you spend it.
Northrop. I'm the Director of Programmes and Practice at the New Economics Foundation, with a focus on local economies. So we talked about having a view of investment that included regeneration monies that are coming into places, and the sort of money that's spent on public services that isn't health and social care, as part of a broader view of what social investment could be. There was an interesting view in the room about the role of regeneration and who it's for and who it should be done by, and also how communities can be involved in that kind of development if they're very busy, or they might not actually be interested. And I think what we kind of came up with was that it would be very, very interesting to think about the role of institutions like the council in enabling a better conversation about development. So if the Royal William Yard had been developed in a community-led way rather than by one developer, what would it look like if it was actually meeting the needs of the people of Stonehouse?
So were there any ideas that stood above others?
It was more that there should be a willingness to work across sectors, to collaborate and have those conversations, because actually people who work in the private sector aren't, they're people too, and a lot of them live here. And so what would it look like if you had a conversation across different people, as the local government, across business and across the voluntary sector and local people, to say what would good regeneration look like?
Do you worry that perhaps it's all fine talking, but actually nothing's going to happen?
So I've spent my life in the kind of voluntary community sector, and I have to say that I think things are changing, but I think there are two parallel conversations that are going on, and I think one is still locked in a voluntary sector mindset, which is about helping people, and the other one is a much more radical kind of mindset, which is about building people's power so that they can have actual control over the things that they need to have control over. And that's an interesting balance to kind of hold and think about how you move one to the other.
Because it's about a shift of power, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And power is
involved with things like ego and control. So those are quite big human traits.
Yes.
Yeah.
And even people that want to do good are also kind of well, they have a role, and so something interesting that came up that's come up in a couple of the sessions this morning is people basically saying, well, we have to make the decisions because people they don't want to.
Sure.
And that's a big misconception.
About collaboration. So this was something Wendy had heard in the morning, which was how do you create a choreography of the willing? So how, if you're looking at the private sector, it's not just a sort of monolithic thing. There are people who work within that sector. There are people who live here who are in that sector. So how do you start to talk to those people, along with people in the voluntary sector, the public sector?
Next we've got Hanna.
Hello, I'm Hanna. I'm a funding manager at the Esme Fairbairn Foundation. And we're going to have a bit of a conversation about when and why funders collaborate and don't collaborate. I'm happy to kind of share experience of work that Esme's done in terms of collaboration. I've also previously worked at Children in Need and have worked on the other side of the fence before I give the impression I'm a career funder. Yes, I'm very interested to hear kind of people's thoughts and opinions on why they think it doesn't happen more, and when you've been involved in funded collaborations, what has and hasn't worked, so that we can draw out some really good learning about actually how we do more better collaboration in the future.
My name's Hanna Lim. I'm a grants manager at the Esme Fairbairn Foundation. Esme Fairbairn is an endowed foundation. We fund UK-wide, give away £45 million a year in grants, and we're also a social investor as well across a wide range of issues. And we're talking about when and why funders do and don't collaborate. And it was really interesting, actually, the various lenses that people kind of approached that at through as well. So some started with a consideration of actually how funder behaviour drives organisational collaborations, how organisations get together in a partnership, and actually some of the negative drivers if people are just doing it to access a pot of money, that isn't a kind of real and meaningful collaboration. We talk a lot about the obvious difficulties in applying for funding, the huge amounts of time and resource that organisations spend making lots of different applications to lots of different funders. But actually we spent quite a long time talking about what happens after that. So once you've built that jigsaw of funding for a piece of work, and then you end up with all these reporting requirements to lots of different funders as well, and how we can make that easier for organisations to manage. So I was talking about a piece of work that Esme Fairbairn are doing around aligned reporting. So we're proactively asking organisations what reports they're already producing for, say, their trustee boards or for other funders, and accepting those as much as we can, rather than asking that people fill in kind of our own bespoke reporting, and actually trying to make it a more useful spending of time for organisations once they've got that funding as well, so they can get on and actually kind of deliver outcomes with that, and that would be a kind of beneficial way for funders to collaborate more as well.
So do you get a sense that there will be some changes made?
It was interesting, actually, there was several people just reflecting with me from the group at the end that they can feel a change that is slow, but particularly over the past 3 years maybe, that they feel the nature of the conversations that they're having with funders around collaboration is materially different, and that all that work around particularly the kind of managing of grants and the way that funders are trying to invest more in relationships and working with organisations on a person-to-person basis rather than a person in a form, actually feels quite different, and that has, because it's relationship-based, because it's trust-based, that has the potential to create longer-term change as well, and that is what we should all be kind of continuing to build on.
Well, this may have been billed as a simple event, but it seems to me that some of the issues being brought up in these conversations are very complicated. We've heard from Clare talking about people being burnt by measurement systems, but at the same time how she is hearing more conversations where people are working collectively, all summed up by the phrase experiential buddying. And we've heard from Francis, who talks about the two parallel conversations of helping people and building power, again summed up by the notion of the choreography of the willing. And Hanna has been talking about the nature of the conversation around collaboration and how that's turning towards relationships and trust. And before we close off, we're going to hear from Sam and Gareth. We'll hear first from them as they outline the aims of their conversation before we then turn to the outcomes of that conversation. So over to Sam.
Say a brief few words about your conversation.
Hello, so I'm Sam Magne and I work for the National Lottery Community Fund. So we get involved at the unsecured loan side of things to small organisations, small size loans. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we're also involved in social impact bonds as well. We're kind of involved in that kind of territory, and other people are involved in social investment in other ways. And I'm interested in having a conversation today with people who want to throw all of that up in the air and then see how we can make it land in a way that means that money is working harder in the way that matters for people in communities. So I'm really excited to have a conversation with you all about that.
And finally, we've got Gareth.
Show me the money. So you've heard a lot about social investment and funding and commissioning. Don't bother with all that. Earn money yourself. If you can generate income by selling services and products, I think you can be more sustainable, or can you? So we're going to be exploring how to raise money, earn money, what the challenges are with that, how to sell, what any issues to do with earning money, income generation.
Is Sam in the room? Yes, here she is in a flip chart.
So we were looking at the question, can we structure social investment to incentivise positive system behaviours? Our answer, I guess, was yes, if we make it part of a bigger picture. And in fact, rather than getting into the minutiae of how you structure social investment, I think what you need to do is actually start with changing everybody's mindset, social investors and funders and organisations in civil society and the clients of those organisations, to think in terms of the systems that we are part of and that impact on our lives. And then we need to draw also amongst ourselves on the skills and the capacity that we can each offer in, as well as drawing upon resource that might be available from funders, to build all of our capabilities and capacity to work on developing this mindset together. And then once we're gathering and working together in this collaborative way, then we need to do the work of understanding the system that you were talking about before, Dawn, and how it needs to change or be optimised, and the assets that we can all play into that, including money, whether it be grant, whether it be commissioned contract, whether it be ways in which you deploy some of that social investment. And then once we've worked out how we can pull on those different assets and how they need to work, we need to make sure that we structure them so that they are auguring well for each other and for what we're trying to do, so that we can be the change that we want to be and that we're looking for.
Have we got Gareth in the room?
Cheers. So we started off really looking at, there's lots of benefits, we thought, of income generation. You know, obviously possibly sustainability. You can expand your audience and your influence. You can create resilience. It gives you unrestricted money. So there's some benefits of trying to earn money, but there are quite a lot of challenges within that. Not least, we had quite a long discussion about the ethics of this, particularly for the sort of charity sector. All sorts of kind of debates about how you make this kind of ethical. If we're going to sell something and earn some money, is this going to link with our social mission? And that sort of culture shift for charities was discussed as well, so particularly with trustees. How do you get trustees to come on board, giving them good business plans and business cases? Trustees tend to be risk averse. We talked a bit about how if you're putting lots of grant funding bids in, you might get 1 in 5, 1 in 10. That colossal waste of time could be used to generate an income or to look at a business plan for income generation. Profit is not a dirty word, you know. The word not-for-profit is really problematic, actually. Does that mean somehow you're for deficit? You're going to go bust quickly if you do that. So, you know, charities can make a profit, you call it surplus if you like. But within that funding world, there's a lot of inertia, you know. Funding works. People get funding, they're good at getting it, and why bother with the challenge of generating money?
Sam talking there about changing mindsets towards systems thinking, and Gareth raising questions over the whole idea of being not for profit. Don't forget, podcast 1, Challenges and Expectations. Podcast 2, Little Heresies. Podcast 4 is all about losing control. And perhaps this podcast 3 is best summed up with these closing words from Sam.
In fact, social investment is not the first idea and then we try and work out how to make the world revolve around it. Social investment comes in at the end and we work out how to structure social investment as part of a bigger picture of resource that we're deploying together.
This is a How production. Please share and subscribe.